Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving deep into what is honestly one of the most misunderstood mechanisms of our entire biology, and that is breathing. I mean, we do it tens of thousands of times a day, right? But it turns out exactly how we breathe, specifically whether we use our nose or our mouth, fundamentally dictates everything from our facial structure and our cellular energy all the way down to our deep sleep architecture. So today, we're going to explore how a single breath basically acts as the master switch for your autonomic nervous system. We'll look at the profound biological divide between nasal and mouth breathing, and I promise you, you're going to look at your respiratory system in a completely new light. Let's get right into it. Here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the power of the nose, then move into the dangers of mouth breathing. After that, we'll cover childhood craniofacial development, sleep apnea in adults, look at some medical and orthodontic treatments, and finally, we'll talk about retraining your airway. All right, Section 1, the power of the nose. So most of us just think of the nose as a filter, but it's actually a wildly complex biochemical powerhouse. Your paranasal sinuses are essentially a factory that's constantly pumping out this miracle molecule called nitric oxide, or NO. And when you breathe through your nose, you automatically inhale this gas. It acts as what we call an aeracrine hormone. It travels straight down into your lower respiratory tract and acts as a massive bronchodilator. It literally forces your airways open and optimizes your body's ventilation perfusion matching. Basically, it redistributes the blood flow in your lungs to the areas that are getting the most air, which optimizes things right down to the cellular level. And because of that amazing vasodilation and optimized blood flow, nasal breathing actually enhances your systemic arterial oxygenation by 10% compared to breathing through your mouth. Now, 10% might not sound like a huge number out of context, but biologically, that is a massive metabolic advantage. It directly feeds your mitochondria, which supercharges your cognitive function, helps with memory consolidation, and drives physical recovery. Just by using the right biological pathway, your body systematically extracts more life-giving oxygen from every single breath.
Which brings us to Section 2, the dangers of mouth breathing.
When we look at this from an evolutionary perspective, the contrast is stark. Nasal breathing actively warms, humidifies, and filters the air while delivering that crucial nitric oxide we just talked about. Mouth breathing, on the other hand? Well, it's really a pathological adaptation. It dumps cold, unfiltered, unconditioned air directly into your lungs, completely bypassing your natural chemical signaling, which triggers a bunch of mucosal inflammation. And it gets worse during sleep. When you mouth breathe at night, it completely alters your airway geometry. Your jaw rotates backward, the tissues sag, and your airway becomes incredibly prone to total collapse.
This structural collapse kicks off a brutal biological domino effect. Yes, you get the oral health issues, tooth decay, cavities, and bad breath because chronic dry mouth strips away the protective saliva. But the real danger is systemic. It causes severe sleep disruption and snoring, which entirely shatters your circadian rhythm. That fragmentation interrupts your brain's glymphatic clearance, meaning your brain can't clear out neurotoxins properly overnight, and it actively suppresses your immune system. So mouth breathing isn't just a bad habit, it's actually a blaring alarm for deep autonomic nervous system distress. Let's look at where this starts in Section 3, Childhood Craniofacial Development. It's honestly mind-blowing, but the biomechanics of how a healthy face grows rely almost entirely on the tongue. When a kid naturally nose breathes, their lips stay sealed and their tongue rests firmly pressed up against the palate. The tongue is an incredibly powerful muscle, so it acts like a continuous internal scaffold. It pushes outward, perfectly counterbalancing the inward pull of the cheek muscles. And that dynamic equilibrium is exactly what allows a child's upper jaw or maxilla to grow wide and strong, creating a broad palate with plenty of room for all their teeth. But if a child's nasal airway gets blocked, say by allergies or enlarged adenoids, everything falls apart. They have to open their mouth to breathe, the tongue drops away from the roof of the mouth, and suddenly that internal scaffolding is just gone. Without it, the upper jaw actually collapses inward, forming this high, narrow arch. The teeth get severely crowded, the entire trajectory of the face shifts downward and backward. Clinicians call this adenoid fauces. The child's facial structure is literally morphing to accommodate a compromised airway, leading to a long lower face and really severe bite issues. So since kids adapt to these restricted airways so incredibly well, often in ways that parents completely miss, how do doctors actually catch this hidden pathology in a clinical setting? Well, professionals use some really clever clinical assessments to figure out what's going on. Take the Rosenthal test, for instance. A child takes 10 to 15 deep breaths just through their nose with their mouth shut tight. If they're a healthy breather, their pulse stays perfectly flat. But if their heart rate spikes,
That is absolute proof that their sympathetic nervous system is actively panicking for oxygen. Then you've got the mirror test, where they hold a cold mirror under the nose to look for symmetrical condensation, and the Nares reflex test. For that one, they pinch the nostrils closed for 2 seconds. When they let go, the nostrils should instinctively flutter open. If they don't, it means the airway is physically compromised.
Moving on to Section 4, Sleep Apnea in Adults. Obstructive sleep apnea, or OSA, is at its core a structural failure. Remember that downward and backward facial growth we talked about in kids? Well, in an adult, that posteriorly displaced soft palate and retruded lower jaw severely choke off the space right behind the tongue. So, when your muscle tone naturally relaxes as you enter deep sleep, this narrow airway physically collapses shut. Your brain suddenly senses an extreme drop in oxygen and thinks, "We are choking." It triggers a massive HPA axis stress response, dumping cortisol and adrenaline into your bloodstream just to jolt you awake. And this can happen dozens, sometimes hundreds of times a night. It utterly destroys your restorative sleep architecture.
And this is exactly why we need to talk about the massive internet trend of mouth taping. Look, for healthy people, taping is a fantastic tool to train nasal breathing. But if you have undiagnosed sleep apnea or a structurally blocked nasal airway, mouth taping is incredibly dangerous. You're essentially sealing off your body's backup emergency oxygen supply. Doing that drastically worsens oxygen desaturation and forces your heart and cardiovascular system to work under an extreme, life-threatening load. You simply cannot force air through a blocked tube. You have to address the underlying anatomical blockages first.
Which takes us right into Section 5, Medical and Orthodontic Treatments.
The good news here is that modern medicine offers some incredibly precise structural solutions for these exact anatomical bottlenecks. If the cartilage dividing your nose is crooked, a septoplasty can straighten it out. If the tissues inside your nose are chronically swollen, a turbinate reduction shrinks them. If enlarged tonsils are acting like giant roadblocks in a child's throat, an odontotonsillectomy clears them out. And if the root cause is a narrow upper jaw, we now have advanced orthodontic interventions like MARPE to physically expand the actual skeletal framework.
Now, the goal of these ENT surgeries is definitely not cosmetic. It is entirely about re-engineering the actual volume of the airway. An endoscopic septopathy reshapes the bone and cartilage entirely from the inside. A turbinopathy uses cool tech like radiofrequency to shrink that inflamed tissue. For adults with severe OSA, reducing the base of the tongue physically stops it from falling backward into the throat. By knocking out these structural bottlenecks, doctors are actively removing the physical triggers of that sympathetic nervous system stress we talked about, which finally paves the way for deep, restorative sleep.
And I have to mention MARPE, or a mini-implanted assisted rapid palatal expansion, because it is one of the most mind-blowing advancements in adult orthodontics. For the longest time, we thought adult skulls were totally locked and fused in place. But by anchoring tiny micro-implants into the mid-palatal suture, orthodontists can gently coax the roof of the mouth wider. And because the roof of your mouth is also the floor of your nasal cavity, this process literally expands your nasal airway volume from the inside out. It leverages adult skeletal adaptability to massively drop airway resistance and permanently improve sleep apnea. It's truly amazing. Finally, Section 6, Retraining your airway. Okay, so once the airway is physically cleared out, we enter the fascinating world of neuroplasticity with myofunctional therapy. Think of this as highly specialized physical therapy for your throat and mouth. After years of mouth breathing, your body has built deep neurological habits that have to be actively rewritten. First, you target and tone those weak, flaccid pharyngeal muscles. Next, you strengthen the soft palate so it stops collapsing on you during deep sleep. And ultimately, you retrain your brain's motor pathways to instinctively keep your tongue suctioned flat to the roof of your mouth, lips sealed 24/7. That restores the essential internal scaffolding you need. On a day-to-day level, optimizing this entire system means leaning heavily into parasympathetic regulation. Simple things help tremendously. Saline nasal sprays before bed can clear out irritants and drop mucosal inflammation. Doing vagal tone breathing practices or yoga directly strengthens your respiratory muscles and pulls your nervous system right out of fight or flight mode. Lowering your daily cortisol stops you from default stress breathing. Even just using a really supportive memory foam pillow keeps your neck perfectly aligned so your airway doesn't kink while you sleep. It's all about continuously signaling deep autonomic safety to your biology. When you synthesize the molecular biology, the craniofacial structures, and the neurology, it all comes down to this ultimate truth. By prioritizing nasal breathing, we can harness the power of nasal nitric oxide and breathe our way to better health. It is honestly, arguably, the single most direct and accessible biohack we possess to consciously regulate our autonomic nervous system, optimize our mitochondrial output, and guarantee profound, systemic physical recovery.
We've traced the journey of a single breath today, from the microscopic release of nitric oxide to the physical structural evolution of your face, right down to safeguarding your deepest sleep architecture. Now that you know the immense biological power hidden just behind your nose, will you change the way you breathe tonight to protect your health and your future? Really think about it. Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer, and keep learning.